Hey guys, I'm Tom, the Tech Chap, and I want to see which phone has the best camera, the OnePlus 6 or the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. Now to be fair, the S9 Plus is a lot more expensive, so it's going to be interesting to see if it does take better photos and videos, what the difference really is. Now this first one of a merry-go-round on London's South Bank, and my first reaction is it's actually quite hard to tell them apart. I can see that the colour on the ground is a little bit different. The S9's got a sort of bluish hint, whereas I think actually the OnePlus 6 has a more natural grey tone to the pavement. Even though the subjects are all moving, everything seems to be in focus on both. I think I'm going to actually say the OnePlus 6 for the more colour accurate ground. And once again, this is going to be a tough one. Unless you're seeing something I'm not, I can't tell these pictures apart. It's too close to call. I'm going to call this one a tie. This is my trusty GH5 camera, which I use to shoot all my videos. What I would say is the Lumix text on the S9's photo is a little bit sharper, it's a bit clearer than the OnePlus 6. I'm going to go with the S9 Plus for the slightly better detail in the shadows and the crisper text. But then I'm going to have to switch and go with the OnePlus 6 for this close-up photo, where it actually looks a bit sharper on the OnePlus 6. The S9 looks comparatively a little washed out. It's not quite as pleasing to the eye. So for this close-up, I'm going to go OnePlus. This is a really tricky photo. We've got light and dark areas, and I think the S9 Plus is the clear winner. It's much brighter, there's a lot more detail in the trees, and also on the pods of the London Eye, which are much darker on the OnePlus 6. If you look at the sky in the background, it's a deeper blue on the OnePlus, whereas it's a bit warmer on the S9, and it also looks a little less contrasty. Between these two, I think it's a clear winner for the S9 Plus. So it's getting a bit later on in the evening. I'm now at the pub, as you can see, and this is a really interesting photo because first impressions, there's not really much in it. Again, they both look great, although the theme of the S9 producing slightly warmer and also slightly less contrasty photos does seem to carry on here, especially if you look at the brickwork on the pubs and the sign. But what I am noticing is if you look at the skin tones on the people at the bottom left, the woman and the man's legs on the OnePlus 6 are much more color accurate. The highlights aren't blown out, whereas on the S9, there's much less detail there. There's a yellowy, warmer tint to it, and it's just too bright. So I'm going to call this one for the OnePlus. And I'm really struggling to tell a difference here. What jumps out, I suppose, are the trees in the background. They're more vibrant on the S9, again, a little warmer. But between the two, I mean, I'm looking at the bags in the foreground, the skin tones, that miserable, angry looking guy on the left. The S9's photo is slightly brighter overall, so there's a little bit more detail in the shadows, but really, I am just clutching at straws on this one. I'm gonna call it a tie. Now this is interesting because on the face of it, there's not a huge amount between them. They're both great photos, but if you look at the lady's jacket, especially below the bag, you can see a lot more detail on the jacket itself in the S9's photo, whereas it's a bit more blurry on the OnePlus 6. But having said that, the way out sign at the top right of the photo looks better on the OnePlus. The highlights are a little bit blown out on the S9 Plus. But between these two, because of the extra detail, I'm gonna go with the S9. So this is where things get interesting. It's a low light scenario, we're in a bar, the logos on the taps are blown out on both, the skin tones are very, very similar, there's a good amount of detail on the text in the chalkboards. Again, do tell me if I'm missing something here or you completely disagree in the comments, but I'm going to call this one a draw, which I didn't think I would be. This picture seems to carry on the same trends as the previous one. For example, if you look at the hair on the guy right at the bottom in the middle, it's quite a lot more detail on the S9. So the S9 once again seems to offer greater clarity. However, if you look at the cocktail sign, it's less blown out on the OnePlus 6. So it does suggest that even though the S9 may be more detailed in some areas, the OnePlus 6 can handle dynamic range between light and dark areas a little bit better. Now let's move on to the front selfie camera, and there's quite a big difference here. Both photos are pretty good, as we've got really nice lighting, but there's a big difference in the skin tones and the detail. The S9 is just a bit too bright, a bit washed out. I definitely prefer the OnePlus 6 here. Oh god, this is a horrible photo, but it's a low light example of the selfie camera, and they're both pretty bad. You can definitely see a lot more noise, they're a bit more blurry. Neither photo are good looking, and neither am I really in this one, but there we go. But if you look at my jacket, it is much clearer on the S9. There's far less noise than the OnePlus 6. So it seems in good light, the OnePlus 6 takes a better selfie. In low light, in bars, outside at night, perhaps the S9 is the way forward. But what about the front camera's video? Well, this is a test of that. As you can see straight away, the field of view on the S9 is so much wider. So while it looks like it's right up in my face, on the OnePlus 6, I'm actually holding the phones at arm's length, so you're getting a lot more in the frame on the S9, which is quite good, especially if you're doing a selfie with a bunch of mates, so that's quite handy. In terms of video quality, these are both being shot at Full HD, 1080p, although the S9 Plus can shoot at Quad HD on the front camera, but it does then lose stabilization. So if I go for a little walk, well, hopefully you can see whether it's shaky or not. Obviously I can't actually see the footage yet, so you're going to have to tell me. They both look really good, but I think just for that wide field of view alone, the S9 seems to come out on top here. And as I say, you do have that Quad HD resolution option if you prefer. Yeah, pretty good. Now let's move on to portrait mode, and you can see straight away there's a big difference here. Just look at the field of view. When you use live focus on the S9 Plus, it really zooms in, it crops in, whereas on the OnePlus 6 you get much more in the scene. This is another example of just how much more you get in the frame with the OnePlus 6. I may have had a few beers at this point, but between the two photos, even though the S9 is slightly off center, I'm going to go with the OnePlus 6 just for the sheer amount of extra room you get. This is when the phones are held right next to each other. And I must say I do also prefer the colors on the OnePlus 6. They're both great, but for portrait modes, I think the OnePlus 6 is going to take the win. Let's move on to video. Both phones can shoot up to 4K 60, which is what we're looking at here, and they both look good, but as you can see, there isn't any stabilization when shooting in this mode. But if we then jump to shooting at 4K 30, well, you can see a huge difference in the stabilization, particularly on the OnePlus 6. It must be using EIS here, electronic image stabilization, as we are getting a slightly artificial look to the movements, but it is much more stable than the S9. Picture quality is great on both, although we can see as I'm looking at the tree here, the field of view is slightly wider on the S9, you're getting a bit more in the shot. There's also a subtle difference in colors. The S9 is warmer, there's a slightly orangey yellow tint to it, but they both do look good. Here's another example of the difference in the stabilization. They're both recording at 4K 30, and while picture quality is fantastic on both, I'm going to have to say if you're going to use these phones to shoot video, go with the OnePlus 6. That stabilization is seriously impressive. And finally, let's talk about slow motion. Now on the left, we've got the OnePlus 6 shooting at 240 FPS at Full HD, whereas the S9 on the right is shooting at 960 FPS at 720p. Now the OnePlus can shoot even slower than that, 480 FPS, but that drops it down to 720p. And what's interesting is that even though super slow motion is a nice feature to have, it doesn't always look very good. It's noisy, and if you're in dark conditions, it looks pretty rubbish. Most of the time I prefer the more basic 240 FPS slow-mo, which on the OnePlus 6 you can record a full minute of, which gives you 6 minutes of playback. It's actually kind of hidden in the settings, but you can enable just slow motion on the S9 rather than super slow motion. So between the two, when they're both shooting at 240 FPS at Full HD, well, they both look great. But since the S9 Plus does give you the option of super slow motion and also an easier auto mode for capturing it, the S9 is the better option. So then, from what we've seen, which do you think has the best camera? Let me know in the comments below. For me, I'm just really surprised how close it is. If I absolutely had to choose between them, I'd probably go S9 Plus because you get the 2x optical zoom, whereas it's digital on the OnePlus 6. You get a few more options when it comes to slow motion, but the OnePlus was often more color accurate, and when you consider the price difference and that the OnePlus 6 is about £350 cheaper than the S9 Plus, well, for bang for buck, I'd say the OnePlus 6 is the winner. So I hope you found that useful, thank you very much for watching, and do hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more camera comparison videos from me. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.